Fourth aliyah. The peace offering, the shlamim sacrifice, shalom is peace, shlamim is just the plural of that, is described in this aliyah. The shlamim, which could be brought from cattle, sheep, or goats, was shared by the altar, which consumed some of the animal's fats, the kohanim, the ones who actually processed the offering, and the donors of the sacrifice who were given the bulk of the meat. It's called shlamim, or peace offering, because, as the sages term it, it made peace between those three components. The Mishnah tells us that the world stands on three things: on Torah, on service, and on kind deeds. Torah, of course, comes from God down to us. Service is us for or towards God, whether in the form of prayer or in the form of offerings or in the form of any kind of service of God. And then kind deeds, of course, are between two or more individuals. It's between you and your fellow. In this scenario, we have the same exact setup. The three components fill those three roles, those three directions. The altar is where God's flame came down from above and consumed the offerings, just like the Torah, from above down to below. The person who brings the offerings, obviously, is the one who is bringing from below up to above. And the Kohen is the one who engenders peace between the two, engenders an interrelationship, especially when we consider the characterization by the sages of Aaron, and really all of the Kohanim by extension, in that they made peace between people. Aaron made peace between two people who were arguing, a husband and wife who were arguing, etc. So in that regard, these three components that the peace offering makes peace between are the three directions that we learn about in the Mishnah. The aliyah ends with the prohibitions against consuming blood and the specific fats which were offered on the altar. Again, blood is passion, specific fats, the kind of, I forgot what the word is, more like bulbous, spherical fats that are in the animal, are a representative of pleasure. They were to be offered on the altar because any kind of passion and pleasure that we have in life should be for God's sake. These prohibitions apply to all animals, even those not offered in the temple, even those when the temple doesn't even exist. And so to this extent, we have salting of the animal once it's been slaughtered and properly processed, etc., so that the blood should be brought out, should be drawn out through osmosis. By the same token, we have what's called nikur, that we cut off the back half of the animal, and even those that don't cut off the back half of the animal, according to some traditions, that's fine. They have a specific place where they cut out all of the prohibited fats as well as the sciatic nerve. The fifth aliyah. We now begin learning about the sin offering, the chatat sacrifice, brought by an individual who is guilty of inadvertently transgressing a sin. From here until the end of the Torah portion, every single one of the categories of offerings that is discussed are all about some kind of a misdeed. Sometimes inadvertent, sometimes individual, whatever the details are, it's something that happened that's wrong. And we'll note that every single one of the offerings is described as an offering for, or a flame for, or the bread of Hashem. There are many different names for God, each one of them delineating a particular role that he plays in relating to the world. If we were considering offerings that are because of sin or guilt or some kind of a misdeed, it stands to reason that they should be for God as he is our judge. But in the scenario that we read, every single one of these is considered an offering or something of the like to Hashem, to the four-letter name of God. The four-letter name of God is described as the name that bespeaks God's mercy. And therefore, when these offerings are made, they bank on, they draw from an inherent connection to God that actually transcends any kind of misdeed or kind of disconnect that happens because of sin. And therefore, we can effectuate an atonement using these offerings. It seems odd that a person would have to offer an offering, a sacrifice, because he inadvertently transgressed the sin. If it were on purpose, that makes sense, right? I have to atone for something that I did. But it was an accident. If it's an accident, I didn't do it on purpose, so why should I, I'm sorry, but it wasn't my fault, as it were. The reality, however, is that everything in this world happens by divine providence. Nothing happens by chance. And so, when a person inadvertently transgresses, they have to actually evaluate or analyze their spiritual standing. God made it that they should, again, not on purpose, but nevertheless, that they should make a sin. And specifically because it's inadvertent, and it was basically above their head, above their control that it happened, that means that there is something actually very serious to atone for, and therefore the sin offering, the chatat sacrifice, is the first offering that is discussed in this section of the Torah portion. This section discusses the unique chatat sacrifices brought by a high priest who sins, by the Sanhedrin, who issues an erroneous ruling which causes the populace to sin, and a monarch who sins. We'll notice that these three are all leaders. Leaders, whether on the level of spirituality, the high priest, the practical adjudication of Torah law, the Sanhedrin, or the practical leader, the material leader of the Jewish people, the king. We'll note that there is a very peculiar verbiage, syntax, that's used to begin the section that deals with the monarch who sins and the sin offering that he brings. It says, Asher, that's the first word, Asher Nasi, when a king, a monarch, a prince will eventually sin. Asher usually translates as which or that. Usually you don't start a sentence with that or which. Like a proclamation is written as whereas something or other. But that is specifically awkwardly or specially worded in order to draw attention to it. So if that's the case here, what is the attention that's being brought? The word asher, which actually relates to the Hebrew word for happy, ashrei. Osher is to be happy. And so the sages tell us that a nation who has a king that doesn't sweep under the rug his mistakes. He's the king who's going to challenge him. In this scenario, he admits to the fact that he made a mistake and offers this offering, and therefore the nation who has such a humble and God-fearing king should be happy.